After my estranged father died, his wife, the woman who had spent a lifetime erasing me from his world, offered me $10,000 to disappear forever. She thought I was just a worthless secret. But then, my lawyer showed them the single, useless piece of paper my father had secretly given me on his deathbed, and they realized he hadn't just given me a sentimental gift. It was much more. Before we get into all the details, I'd love to know, where are you listening this story from? Let me know your city in the comments. Okay, let's go back to the beginning of the end. I grew up as a ghost. I was the living, breathing secret of one of the city's most powerful men, the industrial magnate Edward Coleman. My mother and I lived a quiet, modest life in a small 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. Meanwhile, his face would stare out at me from the covers of business magazines at the grocery store checkout. I saw pictures of his family, his beautiful, cold wife, Catherine, and his handsome, arrogant son, Richard, at glamorous charity balls and on vacation in exotic locales. They were the Colemans, a dynasty. I was just a footnote he had tried to erase. I only saw him in person a handful of times in my life, always by accident. I remember one time, when I was 10, my mother and I were at a museum. He was there with his family, a patron of the new exhibit. I saw him across the grand hall, and my heart gave a hopeful leap. He looked right at me. His eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. There was a flicker of something, recognition, guilt, before his face became a cold, blank mask, and he turned away as if I were a complete stranger. That was the day I learned my place in his world. I was a secret to be kept, a liability to be ignored. And so it was for 28 years. Until the phone call. It wasn't him. It was his lawyer, a man with a voice as dry and impersonal as a legal document. "Miss Vance," he said, using my mother's last name, "Mr. Edward Coleman is unwell. He is at St. Jude's Hospital and has requested your presence. He has asked to see you." The VIP wing of the hospital was another world. It was silent, carpeted, and smelled of money and antiseptic. His family was waiting in the hallway outside his private room, a hostile reception committee. His wife, Catherine, stood with her arms crossed, her face a mask of cold fury. His son, Richard, leaned against the wall, looking bored and irritated. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," Richard sneered as I approached. Catherine stepped forward, blocking my path to the door. "He is very weak," she said, her voice a low, threatening whisper. "His heart can't take any stress. You will not upset him. You will not ask for anything. You will go in, you will stay for 5 minutes, and then you will leave. Do you understand me?" "I understand," I said, my voice barely audible. I stepped into the room. It was vast, with a panoramic view of the city he had conquered. And in the center of it, looking impossibly small in the large hospital bed, was my father. He was surrounded by a constellation of blinking, beeping machines, a frail old man tethered to life by tubes and wires. This was the first and the last real conversation I would ever have with him. He struggled to speak, his voice a dry, papery rasp. "Lena," he whispered, his eyes full of a lifetime of regret. "I'm sorry. I was a coward, always afraid of her, of the scandal. I should have been a father to you." Tears streamed down my face, but I said nothing. What was there to say?
"I can't change the will," he rasped, a look of desperate urgency on his face. "It's too late. She would fight it, drag your name through the mud. But I have something for you." His trembling hand fumbled under his pillow and pulled out a single, old, folded piece of paper. It was a stock certificate, yellowed with age. He pressed it into my hand, his skin as thin and dry as old parchment. Coleman Originals, Inc. I read the faded, ornate script. It was the beginning, he whispered, his breath shallow. The beginning of everything. It's all I can give you now. Don't let them take it from you, Lena. Promise me. I promise, I sobbed, clutching the strange, seemingly worthless piece of paper. He gave my hand one last weak squeeze, and then his eyes closed. A nurse came in and gently ushered me out. I walked past Catherine and Richard in the hallway. They didn't even look at me. I was a loose end that had now, in their minds, been neatly tied up. A final, awkward duty that had been performed. I walked out of the hospital and back into my own life, a ghost once more. I sat in my small apartment that night staring at the old stock certificate. Coleman Originals, Inc. A quick search online told me what I already suspected. The company had been dissolved in the early 1980s. It was defunct, worthless. My inheritance, after 28 years of silence, was a piece of sentimental trash, a final, empty gesture from a man who was too afraid to give me anything real. The hurt was so profound, so absolute, it felt like a second abandonment. But his last words echoed in my head. Don't let them take it from you. It was a warning. But a warning about what? A worthless piece of paper? It made no sense. And it was that single nagging question, that final desperate plea from a dying man, that would eventually lead me to a lawyer's office and to a truth that was more explosive than I could have ever imagined. In the days that followed my father's death, I learned the true, profound meaning of the word ghost. I was a specter in my own story, a living secret that the Coleman family was determined to keep buried. I read his official obituary online, a long, glowing tribute to the life of a titan of industry, written by a public relations team. It listed his many achievements, his philanthropic endeavors, and his surviving family, his loving and devoted wife, Catherine, and his proud son and heir, Richard. My name, Lena, was nowhere to be found. I had been officially, publicly, and permanently erased from his history. The funeral was an even greater exercise in cruelty. I went, of course. I had to. I wore a simple black dress and sat in the very last pew of the enormous cathedral-like church, an anonymous mourner at my own father's service. I watched as Catherine and Richard sat in the front row, the picture of dignified grief, accepting condolences from a parade of the city's most powerful and influential people. I listened as my half-brother, Richard, delivered the eulogy. He spoke of a man I didn't recognize. He spoke of a loving, present father who coached his Little League games and taught him how to sail. He spoke of Edward Coleman, the family man, the devoted husband. And then he spoke of the future. My father built an empire, Richard said, his voice ringing with the confident, inherited arrogance. And it is now my solemn duty as his only son to carry that legacy forward, to build upon the foundation he left for me. For me. The words were a clear, public declaration of his exclusive ownership, a final closing of the door on any other possibility. After the service, I was treated like a phantom. A few of my father's older colleagues gave me brief, pitying glances of recognition, but quickly looked away, clearly unwilling to engage with the family's uncomfortable secret. Catherine and Richard swept past me without a word, their eyes looking straight through me as if I were made of glass. I was a problem, a loose thread in the perfect tapestry of their grief, and they were all determined to ignore me until I simply faded away.
I went home to my small apartment, the silence of my own humble life, a deafening roar after the performative grandeur of the funeral. On my coffee table sat the old yellowed stock certificate, my inheritance. It felt like a joke, a final, cruel piece of sentimentality from a man who had offered me nothing else. My first instinct was to tear it up, to throw it away and sever my final, painful connection to the man who had been a biological fact, but never a father. But his last words, whispered with the last of his breath, echoed in my mind. "Don't let them take it from you, Lena. Promise me." It wasn't a plea. It was a warning. A warning about what? A worthless piece of paper from a defunct company? It made no sense, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling of urgency in his voice. I had spent my entire life being a ghost. For once, just this once, I owed it to him and to myself to investigate the substance of this final, cryptic shadow he had left behind. The next week, I did something I had never done before. I took a day off from my job at the library and made an appointment with a probate lawyer. I didn't go to a large corporate firm like the one my father had used. I found a small, independent practice run by a woman named Maria Diaz. Her website said she specialized in complex and contested estate matters, and her testimonials were all from people who had been the underdog, the forgotten heir, the David fighting Goliath. She seemed like a fighter. Her office was small but bright, filled with plants and books. She listened to my story with a quiet, patient intensity, her intelligent eyes never leaving mine. I told her everything. About my life as the secret daughter, about the coldness of the Coleman family, about the strange final meeting with my dying father. Finally, with a feeling of deep foolishness, I pushed the old, yellowed stock certificate across her desk. "I know it's probably nothing," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "The company, Coleman Originals, Inc., was dissolved in 1983. I looked it up. But his last words, he made me promise not to let them take it from me. It's the only reason I'm here." Miss Diaz picked up the certificate, her movements careful and deliberate. She examined the old paper, the faded ink, the specific legalistic wording. She looked at me and I saw not pity, but a flicker of intense professional curiosity. "On the surface," she said, her voice calm and measured, "this is indeed a certificate for a company that no longer exists. In 99 cases out of 100, it would be nothing more than a historical curiosity." She paused, placing the document carefully on her desk. "But you are right to question it. Your father was a brilliant and very complex businessman, and men like that rarely do things without a reason, especially on their deathbed." She leaned forward, her expression now serious. "When a company dissolves, it can mean many things. Sometimes it is simply restructured. It becomes a parent company, a holding entity for new ventures. The original name dies, but the legal entity, the root of the corporate tree, can sometimes live on in a different form." A tiny, impossible flicker of hope ignited in my chest. "It is a long shot, Miss Vance," she said, managing my expectations. "A very long shot. It will require a deep dive into decades of corporate archives, something that can be costly and time-consuming. But your father's warning, it's a loose thread, and in my line of work, the loose threads are almost always where the truth is hiding." I thought of the cold, triumphant faces of Catherine and Richard. I thought of my father's desperate, pleading eyes. "Do it," I said, my voice suddenly firm. "Be as thorough as you need to be. Let's find out what he wanted to tell me." I left her office that day feeling strangely lighter. I had no illusions of a hidden fortune, but for the first time, I felt like I was not just the passive victim of my family's story. I was an active investigator. I had taken my father's final cryptic message and handed it to an expert codebreaker. Now, all I could do was wait to see what secrets, if any, the ghost of Coleman Originals, Inc. was waiting to tell. The weeks following my meeting with Miss Diaz were a quiet, agonizing exercise in patience. I returned to my life, to the comforting, dusty silence of the library where I worked, but a part of my mind was now permanently occupied by the ghost of Coleman Originals, Inc. I tried to manage my own expectations. The odds were, as Ms. Diaz had said, 100 to 1. My father's gift was most likely just that, a final, sentimental piece of paper, a relic of a life I was never a part of. To hope for more felt like a fool's errand. The quiet of my new life was broken by the arrival of a thick, cream-colored envelope delivered by courier. It was from the high-powered law firm representing the Coleman estate. The letter inside was a masterpiece of cold, corporate legalese. It formally invited me to the official reading of my father's will, while also graciously extending a final, non-negotiable, preemptive settlement offer, $10,000. In exchange for this generous gift, I would be required to sign a comprehensive, permanent non-disclosure agreement, effectively waiving any and all future claims and legally binding myself to never publicly discuss my relationship to Edward Coleman. They were trying to buy my silence. They were putting a price tag on my existence, and that price was $10,000. The insult was so profound, so dismissive, it was almost clarifying. I didn't get angry. I just scanned the document, attached it to an email, and sent it to Ms. Diaz with a single line, "For your reference." 2 more weeks of silence passed. I had almost given up hope, almost resigned myself to the fact that my father's final act was just another disappointment in a lifetime of them. Then my phone rang. It was Miss Diaz. Her voice, usually so calm and measured, was different. It was practically vibrating with a barely suppressed electric excitement. "Lena," she said, her voice a low, urgent hum. "I think I found something." She paused, and I could hear her take a deep, steadying breath. "No, that's a profound understatement. Lena, I think I found everything. Can you come to my office right now?" The journey to her office was a blur. My heart hammered against my ribs with a frantic, terrified hope I had been too scared to acknowledge. When I walked into her small, sunlit office, it was completely transformed. The calming potted plants had been pushed aside. Her desk was covered not with books and files, but with a vast, sprawling map of my father's corporate life. There were old, printed incorporation documents, historical stock ledgers, and in the center of it all, a large, hand-drawn flowchart that looked like a complex family tree.
"You were right, Lena," Miss Diaz began, her eyes shining with the thrill of the hunt. "Coleman Originals, Inc. was formally dissolved on April 12, 1983. She pointed to a document on her desk, a certificate of dissolution from the state. "This is what your half-brother and his mother see. This is where their story ends. But it's not a bankruptcy." She then pointed to another document dated the exact same day. "On April 12, 1983, she continued, her finger tracing a line on her flowchart, "a new entity was formed, the Coleman Holdings Group. It was not a public company. It was a private, family-owned holding company. And the founding assets used to create it," she looked up at me, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across her face, "were a direct, one-to-one, tax-free transfer of all assets from the dissolved Coleman Originals." I stared at the chart, my mind struggling to keep up. "They didn't kill the original company, Lena," Miss Diaz explained, her voice rising with excitement. "They just put it in the attic.
They gave it a new name and a new structure and then built a multi-billion-dollar mansion on top of that original foundation. But the foundation, the legal root of this entire corporate tree, she tapped the top of the flowchart where the name Coleman Originals Inc. sat like a king on his throne, is still there. It's the legal bedrock of everything they have. So what does that mean? I whispered, my voice hoarse. This was the moment. Miss Diaz walked over to a locked filing cabinet and pulled out the old, yellowed stock certificate my father had given me. She laid it gently on the desk beside the flowchart. A single, ancient key about to unlock a modern empire. Your certificate, she began, her voice now a low, reverent hum, is for one of only 2 founders' shares ever issued for Coleman Originals, Inc. The other one belonged to your father. I spent the last week in the state archives and I found the original corporate charter from 1975. It's an ironclad document, and it contains a poison pill clause, a provision your father must have put in to protect himself in his early days. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on mine. The charter stipulates that the 2 holders of the founder's shares, your father and the other original partner who died years ago, would each retain a permanent, non-dilutable 50% stake in the original legal entity and any and all subsequent entities, holding companies or corporations that grew from it in perpetuity. She let the words hang in the air. Lena, she said, her voice now full of a quiet, dawning awe. When your father's partner died, his 50% share was absorbed back into the company, and your father became the sole holder of the founder's legacy. When he gave this to you on his deathbed, he didn't just give you a piece of paper, he gave his half. This certificate doesn't just make you a shareholder, it makes you a 50% owner, the controlling partner. You don't just own a piece of Coleman Global, you own half of everything. I sank into a chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. The room seemed to tilt, the flowchart of my father's empire swimming before my eyes. The scale of his final act, the sheer brilliant and breathtaking audacity of it, was too immense to comprehend. He hadn't been a coward at the end. He had been a king, secretly passing his crown to his forgotten heir. Miss Diaz let me have a moment to absorb the shock before she slid the insulting $10,000 settlement offer across the table. The Coleman family's lawyers have scheduled the final reading of the will for next Wednesday, she said, her professional demeanor returning, but her eyes were still dancing with the light of battle. They expect you to be there to sign this piece of paper and crawl away in gratitude. They expect a ghost. She smiled, a sharp, dangerous smile. What do you want to do? I looked at the insulting offer, then at the powerful, beautiful stock certificate that held my real inheritance. I thought of my father's last words, "Don't let them take it from you." My shock began to cool, hardening into the same quiet, steely resolve he must have had when he wrote his final plan. "We'll be there," I said, my voice no longer a whisper, "but we won't be signing anything." The day of the will reading, I dressed not for a funeral, but for a coronation, my coronation. Miss Diaz had advised me to project quiet confidence, to embody the role I was about to inherit. I chose a simple, elegant, dark blue dress and a single piece of jewelry, a delicate silver locket my mother had given me. It was my only connection to a family that felt real. As we rode the silent express elevator to the penthouse floor of the city's most powerful law firm, Miss Diaz gave me one last piece of advice. "Let them have their moment," she said, her voice calm and steady. "Let them read the will. Let them make their insulting offer. Do not react. Do not show any emotion. Let them believe they have won completely. Arrogance makes people careless." The conference room was a monument to corporate power. A single, massive mahogany table, polished to a mirror shine, sat in the center of a room with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking, godlike view of the entire city, my father's empire. At the head of the table sat my father's wife, Catherine, and my half-brother, Richard. They looked like royalty, dressed in perfectly tailored black, their expressions a practiced, solemn mask of grief that did not quite reach their triumphant eyes. They were the victors, and this was their victory lap. They acknowledged my entrance and Miss Diaz's with a small, cold, and dismissive nod. They saw my lawyer not as a threat, but as a sign of my pathetic desperation to claw a few more dollars from their vast fortune. We took our seats at the far end of the table, the distance between us a vast, unbridgeable chasm. The estate lawyer, a man as polished and expensive as the table, began to read the will. It was a long and complex document, a testament to my father's business acumen, but its intent was simple. It named his wife, Catherine, and his beloved and only son, Richard, as the sole heirs to the entirety of his personal fortune and his controlling shares in the public corporation, Coleman Global. There was no mention of me. It was the final legal erasure of my existence, and I could see Catherine and Richard exchange a small, almost imperceptible smile of satisfaction. When the reading was concluded, their lawyer, a man named Mr. Hayes, turned his attention to us. He slid a thick, cream-colored envelope across the polished surface of the table. It stopped just in front of me. "Miss Vance," he began, his voice dripping with a condescending, patronizing tone. "While you are, as you have just heard, not named in Mr. Coleman's final will, my clients, in a gesture of profound goodwill and in recognition of your biological relation, are prepared to offer you a one-time, final settlement."
He paused, letting his words hang in the air for maximum effect. I could see the cruel, triumphant smirk playing on Catherine's lips. "Inside that envelope," Mr. Hayes continued, "you will find a certified check for the sum of $10,000. You will also find a comprehensive and permanent non-disclosure agreement. If you sign the agreement, accepting this very generous gift, the Coleman family will consider your matter and your relationship to them to be permanently concluded." $10,000. The price of my silence. The price of my life. It was so insulting, so laughably small compared to the billions they had just inherited, that it was a pure, unadulterated act of spite. It was them, one last time, putting me in my place. I did not look at the envelope. I did not look at them. I looked at Ms. Diaz. I gave her a single, slow, almost imperceptible nod. "It's time." Miss Diaz stood up, her movements calm and deliberate. The quiet authority in her presence immediately commanded the room's attention. "My client, Miss Lena Vance," she said, her voice ringing with a clear, calm power that was a stark contrast to Mr. Hayes's oily condescension, "formally rejects your insulting offer." A flicker of annoyance crossed Catherine's face. Mr. Hayes looked irritated. "I assure you, Miss Diaz," he said, "that offer is final and non-negotiable." "Oh, we are well aware," Miss Diaz replied with a thin smile, "and we are not here to negotiate. We are not here as beneficiaries of this will at all." She paused, letting her words sink in. "We are here as the majority owner of the corporate entity this will purports to govern." A confused silence fell over the room. Richard let out a short, barking laugh. "Majority owner? What are you talking about? That's insane." "Is it?" Miss Diaz replied, her voice as smooth as silk. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a single, ancient-looking document, protected in an archival sleeve. She gently placed it in the center of the table. "I believe you are all familiar with Coleman Originals, Inc., the first company your father founded in 1975. That company is defunct," Mr. Hayes scoffed. "It was dissolved 40 years ago. It's worthless." "It was not dissolved," Miss Diaz corrected him, her voice sharp as a razor. "It was restructured.
It was transformed into a private holding company that retained 100% of the original founder's shares. A holding company that, in turn, became the parent entity for every single corporation in the Coleman global empire. She tapped the document on the table. The original corporate charter, which I have a copy of here from the state archives, is an ironclad document, and it contains a very interesting and legally binding provision regarding the two original founder shares. She then turned her full attention to Catherine and Richard, whose faces were now masks of dawning, horrified confusion. "This," she said, her voice now a low, triumphant hum, "is one of those two shares, a 50% non-dilutable controlling interest in the entire Coleman global empire. It was gifted to my client in person by Mr. Edward Coleman on his deathbed." She let the silence stretch for a long, agonizing moment. "So, you see," she concluded, a sharp, dangerous smile on her face, "this will," she gestured dismissively at the documents in front of Mr. Hayes, "is all very impressive. It grants you control of Mr. Coleman's personal effects, his art collection, and his minority share in the company. A very generous inheritance. But the controlling interest, the chairmanship of the board, the final say on all corporate matters, and the majority of the fortune, that now belongs to Miss Lena Vance."
The color drained from Catherine's face. The arrogant confidence she had worn like a suit of armor evaporated, leaving her looking old and frail and terrified. Richard just stared, his mouth opening and closing, making small, strangled sounds of disbelief. Their perfect, triumphant day, the culmination of their life's ambition, had just been utterly and completely demolished by a ghost from the past, by a single, useless piece of paper. They had spent a lifetime erasing me from the family story. They had no idea that my father's final, secret act was to make me the author of its stunning final chapter. The silence in the grand conference room was a fragile, crystalline thing, and my lawyer's final words were the hammer that shattered it into a million pieces. For a long, stunned moment, no one moved. My father's wife, Catherine, and my half-brother, Richard, just stared, their faces a ghastly, pale white, their minds clearly struggling to process the cataclysmic shift that had just occurred. The empire they had woken up this morning believing was theirs had just been legally and irrevocably handed to the ghost they had spent a lifetime trying to exorcise. It was Catherine who broke first. Her cold, regal composure, a thing she had cultivated for decades, completely disintegrated. She shot to her feet, her chair scraping violently against the polished floor. "This is absurd," she shrieked, her voice a raw, ugly thing that was stripped of all its earlier sophistication. "A trick! He was a dying, senile old man. She was the last person to see him. She manipulated him. This is a forgery. We will fight this. We will see you in court for the rest of your pathetic little life." Richard, jolted from his own catatonic shock, joined the chorus, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and childish panic. "You can't do this," he bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "That company is mine. It is my birthright. You are a nobody. You are nothing." Their own lawyer, Mr. Hayes, was frantically trying to quiet them, his face pale with the professional horror of watching their clients completely implode. "Catherine, Richard, please," he muttered. "This is not the time or the place." But it was Miss Diaz, my lawyer, my champion, who took control. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She simply stood and addressed Mr. Hayes as if my hysterical relatives were merely unruly children in the room. "Counsel," she said,
her voice like ice. "A document is authentic, witnessed, and legally unassailable. Your clients are welcome to challenge it, but I advise you to remind them that any such challenge will be defended by the full resources of the Coleman Global Legal Department, which, as of this moment, answers to my client." The finality of her words, the sheer, brutal checkmate of it all, seemed to finally silence them. And now, for the first time, I spoke. I rose from my chair at the far end of the table, my movements calm and deliberate. I was not the forgotten ghost anymore. I was the majority owner. "You had a lifetime to treat me like family," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of 28 years of silence. I looked at Catherine, then at Richard. "You chose to treat me like a dirty secret to be swept under the rug. My father, in his final moments, chose to honor the truth of his blood." I then turned to the lawyers, stepping fully into my new role. "Ms. Diaz, please schedule an emergency meeting of the Board of Directors for 9 a.m. Monday morning. Mr. Hayes, I expect your clients to cooperate fully with the transition of power." I looked back at the two shattered people who had once held so much power over me. "This meeting is over."
The weeks that followed were a storm. Just as Catherine had threatened, she filed a lawsuit, contesting the gift, claiming I had exerted undue influence on a dying man. The story became a sensation in the business world. The secret daughter, a vicious battle for control of the Coleman empire. But the battle was a short and one-sided affair. My father, in his quiet brilliance, had been one step ahead. The meeting in his hospital room had been secretly recorded by a discreet camera, a final piece of evidence he had left with his lawyer. The footage of him, lucid and determined, pressing the certificate into my hand and giving me his final warning, was presented to the judge in a private chamber. The lawsuit was dismissed the same day. The emergency board meeting was the true coronation. I walked into the same grand boardroom where my father had ruled, and I took my seat at the head of the table. Richard was there, as a minority shareholder, his face a mask of sullen, resentful defeat. I did not come in with a speech about revenge. I came in with a plan. I spoke of my father's true, original vision for the company, Coleman Originals, a vision of innovation and integrity. I outlined a new path forward, one that invested in new technologies while also creating a massive new philanthropic arm of the company to be named after my mother, the woman he had loved and left so many years ago. I was not there to tear down his legacy. I was there to redeem it. Richard was forced to sit there and listen as the board, impressed by my vision and my undeniable authority, voted unanimously to approve my every proposal. It was his ultimate humiliation, not just to lose his empire, but to watch the nothing girl he had so disdained run it better than he ever could have. It has been a year now. I sit in my father's old office, a room I have redecorated to be filled with light and warmth. The company is thriving under its new direction. Richard, unable to handle his diminished role, sold his remaining shares and moved abroad. I have not heard from Catherine. On my desk, next to my computer, sits the old, faded stock certificate, now framed in simple, elegant silver. My vindication was never about the money, I now understand. It wasn't about the power or about seeing the look of horror on Catherine and Richard's faces. It was about this quiet office, this chance. A chance to honor the father I never knew by becoming the leader he always should have been. He had spent his life a coward, but his final act had been one of breathtaking courage.
He hadn't just given me a company, he had given me my name. An absolutely unforgettable story about a father's final act of redemption and a daughter stepping into her power. What do you think of the way Lena's father planned his final surprise? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love to hear your take. If you were inspired by this incredible story of inheritance and justice, please show your support by hitting that like button. And be sure to subscribe for more powerful daily stories. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.